Hey Neha, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Trying to have for anyone on video, which we tried to somewhat equalize our height today, so I'm not just like a massive floating head. I probably have a literal and metaphorical bigger head than Neha in real life, but no reason to make a big
I
deal
think
of
that's
that.
true. Yep. No arguments for me.
Yeah, awesome. So today we thought we might talk about what you do when things go wrong as a leader. So I guess starting off with maybe like definitions, like Nick, how would you define when things are going wrong, or how do you know when things are going wrong?
Yeah. I think there's kind of like two forks to the road about when things go wrong. There's like things that if you enter into a brand new situation, you are going to like reassess and you're going to try to figure out what the vibe is and how people are doing. And so things could be going wrong not due to your fault. And then if you stay in the role long enough and you get the pleasure, you get to mess things up yourself. And then you will inevitably make things go wrong yourself, right? And I think that the first bucket is difficult in some ways, but the second bucket of like you actually messing up and things going wrong or things going wrong under your watch are the hard ones because then you have to have that like self awareness and evaluation to be like, oh man, I messed up. I have to do something. When do things like, what are the signs? I think easiest one is to ask people how things are going. Don't ask if you don't want the answer to be somewhat hurtful. But like, I think other signs, right? If you just see that things aren't getting done, if you see that when I took on the VP role for like my last role, I did some AMAs and the questions I got were like harsh and like hurtful and like really intense. And actually, aside from my first role, which were like a bunch of lovely three individuals, in the director role and in the VP role that I entered into, where I didn't know the whole team, but I had like somewhat of a reputation for people to feel like they could ask me anything because I always had like an open policy. You can ask me anything as long as it starts from curiosity. I got questions that did not start from curiosity and I took it and I like went with the questions and I said, here's what I think you mean and here's what I think we should do about it. But that was a sign for me that like it was almost as if they lacked so much psychological safety or they had been asking questions for so long and hadn't gotten answers that they did not care whether or not they were approaching with curiosity anymore. And they like wanted answers and they just wanted someone to come to them. And of course, what I did was I answered those questions. And then later in writing, I was like, well, let's have a little chat. These questions did not approach with curiosity. I'm going to show you how you can transform these questions into curiosity and now we're going to have you pre-submit some questions so that I can form these with curiosity and not affect everyone. But that was like a big sign to me is just like how people are asking questions, how people are approaching each other, and if there's like how much animosity there is. And then like also like honestly asking people how things are going and what they think that they wish would change, etc. When people are pointing fingers at each other a lot, right? And they almost have like gotten past the point of accepting fault, I know that things are going wrong. Right. And like I need to start unraveling it. And I know it's not going to be some simple thing where I can just say, engineering manager, go figure it out. It's bubbled to something higher, you know? Yeah, what about you? I mean, like, you're now talking to different companies, and even at GitHub, you swooped into various teams. Sometimes I remember, we were trying to make some of our products more successful, and we knew that they weren't working for GitHub. So we're like, "All right, Mike McQuaid, can you just, like, go in and figure out what's going on and why people aren't using this tool?" And you did it twice. So, like, you've swooped into different teams, you've swooped into different areas, and then now you're swooping into different companies. What are, like, your telltale signs where you're like, "Alright, something's up. I sniff a trail, and I need to do something about it."
Yeah, I think the first and I guess worst sign is, I guess you sort of talked about in some ways a middle way where you try and give people the space for questions and you just get like sort of animosity back, right?
Yeah.
I feel like the step I've seen sometimes, even before that, is like people have been conditioned to like don't even ask the questions, right? Like just be completely silent, and you might do like AMAs or whatever, and then people are just
Oh, yeah, that's even
no one
worse.
asks
No
you a
one's
question
saying
at all,
anything?
right?
Yeah.
And in situations like that, sometimes like I've longed for the awful questions that make me
Yeah,
look
"Come at
like
me,
a dick.
please."
Yeah, exactly, because it's like at least that's something, and I think I. I guess for me, like what I try and do is particularly if people seem really upset or angry or not working or whatever, is be like, okay, everything after this point is information, right? Even if it's like literally people just
Mhm.
like insulting me or not trusting me or whatever, like it tells me something. Um, I guess the other thing I like is if I can model the behavior I want to start seeing. So if I can, again, like we talked previously about screwing up and apologizing, if I can do that and if I can admit fault and people can learn that, oh, like even the maybe more senior people or can do that and there's not negative consequences for doing so and that makes us all feel nice, then they might do a bit of that. Because again, like I think we've talked about this before, but in my mind, in any situation, the person who is convinced that they are 100% right is definitely at least like essentially the people I've known a bunch of people who are like convinced that they're not completely in the right, who sometimes are, but I've never met someone
Mhm.
who thinks they are completely in the right, who are actually completely in the right. So yeah, I guess the other thing I just look for is just try and yeah, extract as much information from everyone, anyone who will talk and give as much thoughts as possible. And then what I might not say to them at the time, depending again on the level of psychological safety, is that like often, particularly when I deal with engineers, people jump straight to this is the problem and this is what we should do about it, right? Or maybe not
Yeah,
even state the problem
solutioning
at
right
all.
away. Yeah.
Exactly. So trying to almost like tease out like what's the problem. And then sometimes you can only figure that out by you speak to three people who have three solutions, and then you figure out, okay, underneath all of them is this one problem, right? And let's try and do something about that. So yeah, and I mean, I
I think
guess
there's
like part
something really valuable here, which is that not all, especially from engineers, you're not necessarily gonna get the problem. So just instead of cutting them off and being like, "Let's not solutionize," maybe you just let them talk for a bit, and then you can deduce the problem based on the commonalities of what you're hearing. So I think that that's, like, actually a really cool pro tip.
yeah, yeah, I think that's I don't know. I've found that works in lots of areas with engineering. I guess in open
Just let them
source and
talk.
stuff like that, where I'm like doing product managery sort of things. Like, yeah, you get the same thing in product, right? As well, where
Yeah, true.
like I guess my product saying has been like users are like babies in that they are good at crying and signaling that something is wrong, but rarely good at articulating like how the problem should be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, like people can sometimes not voice questions or solutions or whatever. Like one of it comes from like almost like if I do this, I'm going to get slapped down. There's not the psychological safety,
Yeah.
and then there's also kind of maybe the slightly like whether it's well if it's true like the kind of well leadership doesn't care, right, and there's no point in
Yes.
providing input because it's a waste of
Yes.
energy. And sometimes if it's
Yes.
not true, even the perception of like the or learned helplessness of like well like we've tried to fix this a bunch of times and we can't fix this, so like there's no point in talking about this anymore or raising it or whatever, we'll just accept this is how it is.
So the interesting thing here that I'm realizing is that, you know, we both will look at the team to see what the team is internalized to be like, okay, cool, something's wrong. I like need to unravel this like thread. But there's also like root causes, right? So it's like you mentioned apathy, right? If there's like leadership apathy, we, as like in positions of leadership can test that right away, right? So it's like the team perceives apathy that may or may not be true and like, actually, mostly it's usually true, right? To a certain extent. And so just like asking leadership what they think about things and what they think the problem is, right? I never see them fully line up, but I do feel like I can get data. Like you said, and Lara Hogan's always said this like very concise phrase, information is data, which I always love. And so it's like you can get data on what's going on. So it's like leadership is ignoring you, or you could just look at the roadmap and be like, are we shipping? Are we like ever on time for any of our goals? Those are quantitative, more closer to quantitative or like closer to the root of like, okay, cool. I've found dissent. Now can I validate it? And can I actually understand, okay, are things actually wrong or is it a perception issue? You can fix perception issues pretty quickly. But when things are like, if trust is lost to the point that there is apathy, right, then you've got a bigger job and you can kind of gauge what you need to do from there, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess speaking of things you need to do from there, like the you mentioned, I guess one of the most obvious ones, which is like, if you're building software, right? If the shipping velocity is way down, like most software engineers want to actually ship things. So like I guess that would be a starting point, like getting the team shipping, and then people are probably going to be happier doing that. But yeah, what do you think are some other like next steps? Okay, you've figured out you've got a reasonable idea of what the problems are. You've got a reasonable idea of, maybe some next steps that can at least be tried. Like, what do you do next to actually move things forward?
Yeah. So I think that this step that people skip the most is vocalizing that something's wrong. And like as a leader, your job is to call it and say like things are not going well and I need to say something. And I think that people don't want to say anything because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to demoralize people." And it's going to suck if like they hear from me that I admit that things are wrong. But I think there's an art to it. And usually, like, your engineers are smarter than you think they are. And they already came to that conclusion. They're waiting for you as a leader to tell them that you figured it out too. So the minute you can be like, hey, this happened, I'm sorry, we need to do something about it, and I'm going to lead the charge for it, people will be like, oh, fucking finally, like our leaders figured it out. They see what I see. And that's like a middle of the road, a default scenario. There's also like, I think the other part that's often skipped is you come into a situation, it's not your fault. So you're like, what do I have to say sorry for? I didn't do this. And it's like, th- you're a leader, right? Like that is what the money is for. Like you need to go apologize. It does not matter whose fault it is. And it is not okay to say like, oh, I just inherited this problem. The status, like the minute you come in, that's under your watch. And so you still have to apologize from minute one. And so you say, okay, cool. This is what I'm observing. Here are some of the root causes that I see. I'm sorry. Here's the impact I think it's had on you in order for you to feel validated and acknowledged. And like, here's my plan. I'd love feedback on A, B, and C. Or like, I'm not looking for feedback yet, but give me 2 weeks and then I'll come back to you for feedback. Right. And people just want to feel like there's someone with a plan and an intention and a place for them to give feedback. So, like, I think that's the other part that's often skipped is you have a plan and you don't tell people when they can say something. So then they'll say something either right away or they'll be like, cool, they don't even want I know that what they're doing is wrong and they don't want my opinion. So I'm not going to say anything, especially if there's no psychological safety. It's okay to not want opinions right away. Give them a time that when they'll come back, put it on the calendar and ensure there is a retrospective or an open call or whatever that they know that the minute that the door's open, they can say something and they have a place. So I think that that's the biggest skip step is validating feelings, validating what's actually wrong. And I think the other path is, oh, what people think is wrong is not actually what's wrong. So you have to go talk to them and say, okay, cool. I know that this is what you're feeling. Here's what I'm seeing. And I know that's not going to reconcile well with you. Take some time to process this. Here's what I'm going to do about it. Here's the impact that I think it'll have. Give me this amount of time to show that to you. A
Yeah,
plan.
I think the plan is key, right? Like that's really what most people want, particularly when there's been problems that have been unacknowledged. And then, I guess we've said already, like step one is acknowledging them. And step two is being like, okay, here's how we think we're going to fix it. And here's a time scale attached to that. And here's some like and it's not like, well, in 3 to 6 months, we might think about doing something about this, but having something where even if it's something really small, like, let's do something straight away, right? I think like what I sometimes can struggle with is because I'm tend to default to like action and iteration or whatever,
Yeah.
is that sometimes that can come across as like, okay, the plan's written down now, it's completely set in stone. We're never going to change this, right? Like I didn't get my chance to give feedback, but Mike's moving on the plan already. Therefore, sorry, I missed the boat, whatever, right? So I need to do a better job often in those cases of being like, okay, like this is the plan, but like the plan will change. Like a habit I've adopted recently is sometimes literally looking at the plan every week and being like a saying I've been saying is like, is this a lie? Like, is this actually what we're doing? Like, are we doing the things we say we're doing? And in some case, we need to get aligned and say, like, well, let's do these things. And in other cases, it's like, no, we're not, because it doesn't make sense to do that, right? Or we don't have bandwidth to do that, or we've changed our mind or whatever. And then like being able to kind of then publicly like be like, we've changed the plan. And
Yes.
just that idea of almost like iterating and improving things and tweaking things or whatever, but also defaulting to action, I think,
Yes.
rather than we talked previously about like seeking consensus and stuff. And I think like if you're particularly if you're solving problems that have been there for a long time. I think if you try and get consensus first, sometimes that is a, a surefire way to not make any change. And
Yeah.
even sometimes if you make the wrong change and roll it back, at least people can then see like, oh, we're doing something here, right? Like there is
Yes.
movement, there is progress, we have been heard.
Yeah, you can literally change you can turn changing courses into a good thing if you know how to communicate it correctly, which is, "Hey, you all gave me your feedback. And here's what you told me. And accordingly, we're changing because we're listening to you." Literally a win, right? And I think this also comes back to, you said you have a penchant for action, which everyone prefers, right? Like actions speak louder than words. But immediately when you're starting a plan, you can't show action right away. So, ¿por qué no los dos? Like, why don't you have both action and words, right? And so you can tell people what the plan is, and then you can show the action. You can't skip the action because I think that that's like where most people fall over. But what I've observed is that like when you come into a new team, you tell people the plan, they say like, "Okay, that's like a good first step. Let's see if they can actually do anything." And then you have to follow through. You could just do both things. For anyone who does skip to action, you've lost like 2 to 3 weeks of helping people feel like there's something that's actually in play. And actually, your actions might confuse people as to why things are changing. They won't realize that you have a plan because why would they assume that? They would assume that you would tell them. So tell them the action, give them the updates. And also, I think like an asterisk is like, you shouldn't even come up with a plan without consulting a few people. So you should probably consult experts instead of everyone. And when I display the plan, I usually say like, credit goes to XYZ and I name them in there, right? And so it's like it's a kind of a double thing. One is like, y'all can't give me opinions and like not expect it to be written into the plan. And vice versa. They deserve credit, of course, right? And it'll help people feel assurance that like, okay, cool. She didn't come up with this on her own. She actually talked to the right people or some of the people. And I know why what I expected to see is missing is because this person wasn't consulted. So like that's what I can specifically give feedback on now instead of like, I hate it, right?
Well, and I'm glad you said written in because I realized like we've been having this conversation and I guess probably making a bunch of assumptions based on both working at GitHub that
Yeah.
like the plan is written down somewhere that people
Write it
can look at,
down.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like that's often the first step, and sometimes can be missed. Like delivering a plan in in any written form is better than no. If it's depending on your culture, if it's an email or a Slack message or a Google Doc or Notion or whatever, like that's fine, right? Just put it somewhere. I mean, thankfully, not like super duper often, but there's definitely a bunch of times that I've seen leaders where the plan is, it might even be written down for them, but they don't share the written down version. Or worst of all, the plan is in their head, right? The plan is like, I know roughly what we need to do the next 3, 6, 12, 24 months to get to what we have to do. I don't like maybe they articulate the plan to people in like a random Zoom call. Great. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just like, this is what everyone needs to do. And then
Yeah.
in their head, it's obvious because of
Yeah.
the plan. But
100%.
if it's not written down and people can't look at it and people can't share it and people can't critique it. And also, like, I guess to go back to what I said before, if when things are happening and changing and you know, we hit bumps in the road and the plan doesn't change, then similarly, like that is obviously having a written plan is better than no written plan, but also ideally the written plan is updated as information changes
Yes.
along the way.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so I think if you're not already doing that, make sure you write down the plan. But I guess a question I would have for you with this as well is like, I guess particularly when you're coming into a team or organization or whatever. So you maybe say there's an existing process or structure or project or whatever it may be. And part of the plan is we're not going to do that anymore. But the person whose idea that was is still present and working on the team. How do you do that in a way that doesn't just make that person feel like, hey, you specifically over there, you suck. And we're undoing your work because you suck, right?
First of all, I would love for that not to be a surprise. So, how am I going to figure out that that's not a surprise, right? I should probably be talking to people. I should probably be talking to the manager on the team or like someone, right? To be before I put out a plan, I'm going to ask, how are people going to react to this? And I'm going to ask someone who understands the team, how are people are going to react to it? So either I've found that leader already and I ask how are people going to react to it, and that person says poorly, particularly me, or someone else is going to be like, hey, by the way, Mike is going to be pretty pissed about this, and Michaela is going to be pretty pissed about this. So, like, you should probably figure out what to do. And I would say, okay, cool. What do you think I should do? I just ask, right? If there's no one, but I've somehow found a doc that Michaela had authored. And so I can deduce that this person might be upset, but I don't know. I would go talk to them. And I would say, like, hey, I'm going to give them a heads up. That's the important part. They should not be someone who might react poorly, whether it's the leader on the team or just someone who has influence on the team or someone who might be neurodivergent in some way and does have an impact on the team. I'm going to give them a little bit of a heads up. I'm going to say, hey, I've made this decision. I know it's not going to be received well. Like, let's talk about it. Let me walk you through my logic as to like how I got here. And then the second part is, and I learned this from like a I used to do work in college for like young kids who would come to the college and do like fun experiments. The person who's like the loudest in the room and like tries to take over, like there's always one child who like thinks they should be the boss. But they're like 6, right? Or 10. And so you just recruit them to help you. And I saw that happen miraculously with children. I think it actually happens really well. It works really well with adults as well. So I will ask them, I know this is going to be really hard. I can't do this by myself. Will you help me? And now because if you're taking their power away, they don't have a role anymore. And they're asking, where do I fit in now? How do you feel about this? And I'm trying to tell them, you are important to me. The decision is different from you. And in fact, you can help this team get better. Are you willing to work with me? Sometimes people say no and they need time. And so I have to figure out what's going to motivate them. And I'll ask them, like, what gives you energy? What can we do about this? I'm not changing the decision, but I am giving them agency as to how they can fit in. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's all great. Like, and there's a bunch of that I have not been doing and should be, and will start doing. I think for me, a big part of it as well is trying to, and this is like, I would say kind of advanced mode stuff, right? Is you are not trying to get across to people like you are not your work and you are not the output of your team and you are not like, that is not where your worth primarily exists as a human being, right? And I know that maybe sounds a little bit philosophical and squishy and like why, but I think like what ideally when with really, really effective teams, when you do retrospectives or like I guess zero blame postmortem. So the idea for that, for people who might not have come across it, is this idea of like you dig in when a problem has happened. It's particularly common in infrastructure or ops teams or whatever, where there might have been an outage, maybe the site went down, maybe there's security vulnerability or whatever. And basically you just keep digging and digging and digging and maybe ask like 5 whys. That's another kind of framework. And you sort of leave no stone unturned. But if you do that properly and if you have the psychological safety to do that properly, that will probably uncover a bunch of stuff that looks like, how did this happen? Well, first, Mike pressed the button, right? Like, and in a bad culture, then people will jump straight to, oh, Mike did the thing that first led to this shit show. Therefore, Mike needs to not do the thing next time. Like, let's all tell off Mike and shame to Mike, and it's like the Game of Thrones shame bell lady, Mike being paraded naked through the streets. But like in a good culture, what you're able to do is dig in deeper through that and be like, well, Mike pressed the button, and then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. And then be like, well, why do we have a button that breaks everything when you
Right.
press it? Right.
Why
Like,
should Mike be able to
yeah,
press that
exactly.
button? That's not fair to Mike. Like, why did we
Exactly.
put Mike in that position? Yeah.
But in order to do that, someone needs to be able to say, this started because Mike pressed the button. And if you don't
Yes.
have the safety to be able to do that, and
Yes.
if Mike in this analogy is not able to kind of maybe themselves admit that, right? Then that's when it doesn't work as well, because you need to be able to see that like you don't have the consequence of that. I guess another thing that I like to remind people in tech, I remember I had a relatively early experience where I guess like my summer after I graduated, I did this thing called Google Summer of Code, where Google pays you to work for 3 months on an open source project. And I added some like blogging support to the kind of KD like mail Outlook equivalent application. So I got an email, like, I can't remember when it was, like 3 or 4 years later, where someone was basically like, hey, we've got a new library. And essentially, I'm about to delete all your work. Like, is that is that okay? Right. Like, and they were really nice about it and they gave me a heads up and whatever. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. Like, I mean, the software is going to be better and you don't need my code anymore. So great. But, you know, if you work in software, like, say you're lucky enough to retire 20, 30, 40 years before you die, right? Like, chances are maybe literally all of the code you wrote will have been deleted and is not being used anymore for a lot of
Success.
people by the time you die, right? So,
Yeah.
like, there's an inherent impermanence to all of this stuff. And as a result, that's why I think you need to be able to try and get happiness from like, hey, I did the right thing at the time. And in these decisions that I make today, in 1, 2, 3, 5 years, maybe even in 4 weeks, it may be we're like, oh, like I made a smart decision based on the information I knew 4 weeks ago. And then now it's terrible and we need to undo this or whatever. Right. And I guess we've talked about like apologizing and humility and whatever. And I think obviously you need to model that as a leader, but also you need to be able to provide an environment in which you can have people be like, hey, like all the code you wrote in the last 2 years is now deleted, but you didn't do anything wrong. You did a great job. Well done. Right. Like, or the project you worked on for the last 6 months didn't get shipped to customers. That's not necessarily anything you did wrong. It might be we had a bet about the customers or the market or whatever, and that's changed and good job. Right. And I think that's really hard to do, but if you can nail it, is when, you know, you get kind of the self-fulfillment, beautiful, everyone can work most effectively.
And that's like the thing with trust, right? So you are doing something that might suck for people. And so you will either lose a lot of pegs for trust and like go down further down on the ladder because like people are upset and they're in their feels, or you can like turn it around and it can be like positive thing. Rebuilding trust is quite hard. And like for me, I always think about like easy points for rebuilding trust and telling people you're sorry, going and reaching out to the individual leaders, showing that we can move past individual blame and get to the good stuff and do something about it, telling people a plan. All of those are free points. It's just one marble in a jar, right? It's not a huge deal, but all those marbles start to add up so that when we get to action, which is the most important one, we're starting from not zero. We're starting from 3 or 4 marbles that like you can build along the way. And like I don't want to miss those free news cycles of good news to give to the team as we like progress towards the culmination of like action being louder than words and actually going better. But that's like probably the last piece, right? Is okay, go do it. Right. And you have to stick with it. You have to put the right people in place. You have to pay attention. You have to celebrate those milestones and you have to monitor and you have to make hard decisions. And sometimes people aren't going to be happy with those decisions, or sometimes you're going to make a misstep and you need to recorrect.
Yeah. I think going back to some stuff we've said before, I think like the important thing with this stuff is to again make clear it's like, look, if we've got a plan, if we're moving forward, right? If you don't agree, then that's okay. But also, like, we're maybe still moving forward. And if it goes wrong, that's on me, right? Like I'm the primary owner of the plan. I got hopefully a lot of input from a bunch of other people, and people have given their views on it, and we're gonna tweak it along the way based on your input. But like ultimately, I'm the one responsible for this. And I think in another way as well, like I guess the other side can be like if you allow someone to, you know, change the plan dramatically based on their feedback or whatever, also being like, hey, like I agreed with this change and I'm going to go publicly. And like, if my manager or whatever is like, why did you make this change? Like, I'm not going to be like, well, you know, Sarah
So
said
and
that we should
so.
do this, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be like, no, this is what we decided to do. And I have your back as my team, no matter how this goes. We've reached, like, again, not consensus, but like we've reached a kind of an agreement of like how we're going to move forward. We bring on as many people as possible, but I'm not going to sell you out for doing that. And also, like, I'm not going to do an I told you so. But, you know, maybe you can do an I told you so to me in some cases, and I'm going to suck that up because I'm the leader, right? Like that's
Right,
okay,
right.
right? And just again, that thing of like, we talk about again and again, like modeling that behavior and also just trying to be, you know, like hold yourself to a higher standard than you hold maybe other people.
Yeah, it's all about accountability.
Awesome. Well, that was
I think
a
that's a good
lovely
ending
conversation.
point. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
this
fun.
feels like a nice, smooth ending point. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We don't have any listener questions this week, so we'd love if anyone wants to email either of us. Like you can get me at mike@mikemcquaid.com or put something in the YouTube comments, or if you see this on social media, reply on social media and we'll answer your question. And yeah, thanks for listening, everyone, and see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Bye.